glad you're all here, and I'm very excited today to be speaking with one of the most innovative drummers on our planet, Mr. Mike Clark. Mike made his name and continues to make his name, even though he played for a long time before that. He sort of became famous with Herbie Hancock's Headhunters, playing on Manchild, Thrust, and Flood, and then such Headhunters records without Herbie as Survival of the Fittest. And Mike continued to work after that, pretty much sort of diving back into straight ahead, out of which he came. And earlier on, he was a blues drummer back in Texas. After Headhunters, he played with Eddie Henderson, Pharoah Sanders, Joe Henderson, Woody Shaw, Bobby Hutcherson, and on and off with Vince Guaraldi, who he worked with a long time. And I actually became, I think, really aware of you on the Brand X record. Then Mike moved to New York, and he's worked with everybody and his mother since then, including Donald Harrison, Christian McBride, George Cables, Nicholas Payton, Jack Wilkins, Dave Liebman, Jack Walrath. And now Mike has, over the last few months, he's been on one co-leader-led record and 3 other records. And those records are 2 Leon Lee Dorsey albums, a well-known bassist and studio operator here in New York City, and also another album, Live at Vitello's, with another longtime collaborator, pianist Michael Wolf. So, Mike, you've got so much going on. You're still swinging your ass off. If anything, you've really refined your swing as I went back and listened to all these records. But for you, what is the essence of sort of maintaining this vitality you have on the drum set over all these years?
I don't know. I think it's I'm still hungry to be understood and to be heard, and I'm real hungry for as far as playing. Playing to me is the same as it was when I was 8, 9, 13, 16, 25, all the way. So when I play, other than like I've aged and gotten, I can edit myself a lot better, and I've learned a whole ton of a lifetime of stuff, and I'm still learning. But basically, I still have my 20-year-old drum energy. I can throw down all night, 3 sets, 4, whatever it takes. It doesn't seem to make me tired or anything like that. Playing, even after long flights and in the airports all day, and when I get to the gig, I feel I'm ready.
Wow, so it's sort of like riding a bicycle, I guess, for someone of your stature.
There's a lot of memory there, muscle memory, concept memory, and everything, and a lot of experience and miles. But I think it's the joy. When the blues really hits you in the heart, man, you're ready. Then you can't deny it. And I'm always ready to. I'm a hot-blooded drummer. I'm not the most passionate, heaviest, hard-hitting guy, but I like to fire it up. It's just what I know, and it feels good to me to do it. It doesn't tire me. But I also think knowing how to do it helps too. It's like driving a stick shift. After a while, for some people it's difficult, but then after a while, man, you can do all kinds of great creative stuff driving a stick shift. And drums, I feel, are similar. Like once you know what you're doing, of course, you're going to continue to grow and learn, but it's easier and easier.
I think a lot of people don't know that you actually began as sort of a Taps the Wonder drummer kind of guy when you were a child drummer playing in blues clubs in Texas. And you've told me some pretty wild stories. Regale us with one of those stories about playing drums. You played at places like chicken wire around the stage and all that stuff.
Well, I was actually a jazz drummer as a kid, and my father took me to jazz clubs, and he would pay the drummer or the band $5. So this is in the early 50s. It didn't matter. I was 8 or 9 or whatever. I was 7 or 8 or whatever it was. And they would almost always let me play, and I could play at a pretty professional level. I should be more advanced than I am, because you grow in different periods. And childhood to my teens, I had a real rapid growth where I felt like I was really on the cutting edge of the stuff, and then I slowed down for a while and then got going again as far as coming up with new ideas and new ways to play. But before the chicken wire blues clubs, it was my dad had me in all these jazz gigs, strip gigs. Well, New Orleans, Texas, Pittsburgh, New York, California, Oakland, Reno, Lake Tahoe. We met the cats with Louis Primus band. I met the drummers, all of them. I met all. No, that's not true. I met Bobby Morris, and Paul Ferreira, who was also from New Orleans, and they showed me a bunch of stuff when I was a kid. And so I was kind of, and my dad was a jazz buff. So, but then when I started working at high school and around there at the high school age, I was doing most of the gigs you played were big band swing gigs at that time. People were still ballroom dancing and this kind of thing, and that's mostly what I did, and jazz gigs. But I could always play the funky. Like when I first heard Cold Sweat on the radio and I saw that my girlfriend went completely insane, I made it my business to learn. And I could somehow play those beats without teaching myself, without having to practice. I could just play them straight
away. Those beats. You could just hear the beats.
I could hear them and play them because I had chops from the jazz thing, so it was easy to translate at that time. The beats are much more complicated now.
But those original James Brown beats, I mean, I know it's Clyde Stubblefield and Jabba, but what did they come out of? Did they come out of New Orleans drumming? Or what? Probably
out of everything, like Boogaloo from Little Richard. It just kept developing. Yeah, I'd say New Orleans had, in my humble opinion, I'd say had a lot to do with it. But those, you know how at a certain point when you're listening all the time, you can kind of hear what's coming next? Well, those beats to me sounded like a natural progression of what went before. Like you had your regular beats, like let's say, well, then that seemed to me that was the next place to go. I was even going there before I heard anything. I was just goofing around with my drums and came up with something. So when I heard those beats, I could go right into it. So that bought me a huge amount of rhythm and blues and blues gigs, because in those days a rhythm and blues band played a hell of a lot of blues, so you had to develop a cold-blooded shuffle if you wanted to work.
Cold-blooded shuffle.
If I may. I think mine's pretty good. Maybe it's not as cold-blooded as I'd like it to be.
Well, give me one of those stories about being in Texas. I know you played with a major...
I played with Albert King in Texas one time, and well, more than one time. And so he, at the end of the night, I think the gig paid $15, and it was 4 sets in a sawdust floor, roadhouse. At the end of the night, he went, step into my office. So we went to the back of the club, and he put a pearl-handled, I don't know if it had a pearl handle, but a silver sawed-off, snub-nose 38. And the dude's already 6'4" or 6'5", and I'm 15. Wow. He doesn't need a gun, but he puts the gun in one chair and then pays you. And he screwed me for $3. But I was so young, I didn't know to be afraid of him.
How old were you?
15. And I was also stoned. They got me really stoned. So, and I didn't get mad. I just said, hey, that's only $12. And he goes like, he put a joint in my hand and said, there, that'll hold you. Come back, see you tomorrow night. And, I was like, okay. So, I wasn't in his band, but when you played some of those joints, I could play the James Brown stuff. That's how I got those gigs, because they were experimenting, even the blues guys. It was new stuff. And, hey, man, can you do some of that JB stuff? And I'd be like, sure. And that's what did it.
Do you think the nature of straight ahead drumming itself has changed? I mean, on one hand, we have like a Bill Stewart who's to me a very, very traditional drummer. But then on the other hand, we have somebody like Eric Harland who can play straight ahead, but weaves a lot of funk or more modern influences.
I think you just said it right there. Now you can have a rhythm section that adds a whole lot of funk and fusion, and a lot of times it's not that they can't swing. I'm not saying that they won't. It's not really swing. And that's called jazz. So I'm not against it. I'm just saying that's one of the changes. Another thing is a lot of the blues has been left out, and it used to be that was the core of the whole thing. So a lot of the really hard swing, like I like, not everybody plays like that now.
Give me an example of that.
Well, almost everything I heard from 1950, from Duke Ellington, way before 1950, I got to go way back. Everything I've heard from New Orleans, Buddy Bolden, you know what I mean? Like from then until maybe somewhere in the 90s. Now, we're not talking fusion or any of that stuff. We're just talking acoustic jazz. All of that had a blues bass, like the roux of gumbo, the roux of the gumbo. It was like you could feel that. And not all the arrangements were a blues. There was a lot of chord changes now, but you could feel this understanding. And then I think there was a disconnect for a while after Fusion. A lot of guys went to school to learn how to play jazz. They didn't hear all of those great people that my generation heard live. So it's more homogenized. It's more clean. It's like you get it off the records, and it's, the EQs are up and everything sounds real. So it's a different. And then afterwards, I think a lot of guys that mixed this with that, with this with that, and they were called jazz musicians and played jazz festivals. So a lot of the music that I grew up on, all of the Blue Notes, all of that, Art Blakey, all of that, right the way through, Tony before the big drum set, all of this, it's changed, it's morphed. And I think some of the language and the vocabulary. I mean, in 1971, I used to play. I was young, so I heard it wasn't even called fusion yet, and I was coming up with my own ideas, and we'd play all kinds of stuff on top of the swing and be proud of it. But then when you play with some guys like Sonny Stitt or somebody like that, they'd be like, "Hey, what the hell are you doing, man?"
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So really, you're part of that evolution that people have built on. The stuff you did with Herbie.
Yeah, I did. Yes, sir. I know we're moving into something else, and it's like I'm staying with the swing because I'm still working on it. It's taken me a lifetime. I mean, we got all these great. We have Donald Harrison, you have Eddie Henderson, you got Kenny Barron, you have Essiett, you have Gerald Cannon, and you have Ron Carter. You go on with this. Lenny White is a heavy swinger, man. All these guys that really understand this tradition and are still pushing the envelope, but with the blues and the swing still in it, and the tradition doesn't mean we have to play like 1955. Our art and talent, it strikes everybody's brain differently, so I'm pretty liberal about everything. I know what I like to hear me do, but for somebody else, I don't care what they do. I'm down to listen. Like, okay, do your thing. Let me hear it.
Tell me about the Clark Zilber album. I know he's another Bay Area guy, and you guys have worked together a lot. That's it. Oh, thanks for holding that up. I don't have anything to hold up.
Yeah, this is Mic Drop is the name of this, and this
Drop.
and this is out on Sunnyside label, and this is with Peter Barchet on bass, Matt Clark. These two cats are great, hard swinging cats, as is Michael Zilber, who's a hell of a harmonist, saxophonist, and writer. And he wrote a couple of compositions here. He wrote of his own, and the album got in the top 10, and it's still number 13. This is week 4, and we've gotten in Downbeat and Jazz Is and blah blah blah, all about jazz. We have rave. I'm not just making this up. Rave reviews. Everybody so far is like, man. And what this is about is we're swinging, but it's conversational. We're not blowing the wall down. It's not one of those, but we're playing and speaking to each other. So it's an adult. I call this real adult jazz music. I think this is my first record where my point of view is all over this record. Nobody said a word or even suggested, "Hey, Mike, why don't you play this groove, or can you do this, that, or play a Elvin kind of triplet thing, or this or that." Nobody said a word, so I just painted my picture. And I think this is the first record. The only other time I remember doing that 100% is on the track Actual Proof, where Herbie just said, "Do what you want, man," And this record tells my story. Everybody else is telling their story, but as an artist, I'm telling mine right along with them.
You're on 2 Leon Lee Dorsey albums. One is a tribute to Harold Mayburn, and I forgot the title of the other one. Tell me about those 2 records.
The first one is this one, and this is called "Thank You, Mr. Mayburn." And of course, Harold and I and Leon are on the record. It's a trio record, and it was so much fun. It went down just like you hear it. And of course, Harold, if you know Harold, and I'm sure you do, he knows everything about jazz that ever happened. He's an encyclopedia, both from when he plays and when he's talking to you. I mean, it's a lesson in jazz just to even be in the guy's presence, much less play with him. And as far as the blues goes, you can't you can't milk any more blues out of the piano than this man does. Wow. It was joyous. We were all like, after the date was over, we're sitting at the table talking, and we're just like, oh, it was so much fun. It was like everybody loved what we did, and we loved each other. It was beautiful. Then we did another record, Freedom Jazz Dance, and he hired Manny Valera and myself. It's another one that was just like these records are like the old days with Charlie Parker. You go in, you're done in 6 hours. And you're
Manny
on
Blair, the piano player.
yeah, and like very little, no, almost zero Pro Tools, almost no fixes. You just go, what you hear is what it is. So it's really like making a jazz record. There's one we did last year. It's called Wolf, Clark, and Dorsey Play
Cool.
Sergeant Pepper, and we played swing and jazz versions of a lot of the tunes from the Sergeant Pepper record, and. This is with Michael Wolf, my old and dear friend who we still play together. He has his own bands, I have mine, but when we get together, it's beautiful.
You have a newer record with him live at Vitello's.
That's right here, and
Cool.
Vitello's is in Los Angeles, and this was really cool because it's a live gig. I had never heard what it sounded like until the record came out, and it was gorgeous because I'm listening to the radio and I'm like, man, who are these cats? I almost got jealous of myself. Like, when you hear a good drum, you're like, oh, and you want to put him down. You're like, oh, yeah, he's all right. I almost did that to me. It's a straight ahead swinging record, man. Burning at times, fast tempos, the whole 9 yards. I have a beat record that just came out on Yurt Rock, and there's videos on my Facebook page of this. So I have a beat record where people can buy and then use the beats for whatever project they're doing.
Thrust is the first of the three Headhunters records. What was the direction? How did you all come up with those sort of innovative grooves and approaches to that music? You guys were in the studio that day, and I imagine it was more than one day tracking. What was the vibe in the studio? What was the air? What was the direction implied to go where you were going?
Well, first of all, Paul Jackson and I, with the exception of Actual Proof, had some much more advanced, I'll use the term, grooves together than we played on Thrust. But these were the kind of things that sort of fit what we'd been doing on the road. And they didn't want a lot of drumming. They were asking for pocket. And they didn't even use that term. Play time, Mike, play more time. Because I played all of the tracks like Actual Proof, and it was too busy or too this or too that.
So those tracks are out there somewhere. Those should be released.
No, I just start in and they'd stop me and they'd say, no, just play pocket. So, but actually later on an album called The Funk Stops Here, Paul and I played the groove because we'd been playing together 10 years before we ever met Herbie. So we had all kinds of stuff that we could do, but this was only this album consisted of 4 tunes, I believe. But still, the vibe was great. Nobody was like, you have to do this, but they had let me know that, and the band members felt the same way too. They didn't want to, and I'm seeing Lenny White and Sunship and all my friends playing their butts off, and I'm back there playing that funky music, white boy. I'm back there, and nothing wrong with that. I like to chop wood. The vibe was great, and we did Actual Proof, and I started playing just like the way you heard it. I've told this story a lot, and the producer came in, and man, nobody's going to know where one is because me and Paul were displacing the beats and all that stuff, and all that was new back then. Nobody was doing that. It's too much. It's too busy. It's too thick. Nobody's going to be a blah, 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 blah.
What was Herbie saying?
Herbie didn't say a word, which was interesting.
David Rubinson, the producer, was putting his 2 cents in.
Not only putting his 2 cents in, he was actually raised his voice. And I was in those days, I weighed 200 pounds. I did 100 push-ups a day. I was ready to, and I could whip I was ready to go there, man. I mean, it got heavy. And so Herbie, I've told this before, I don't want to bore anybody, but he told me about chanting. So I was so mad, and I snuck in the other room and chanted 20 minutes. And I chanted, my prayer was, I chanted Nam Yo Ho Renge Kyo. So I'm like, Nam Yo Ho Renge Kyo, Nam Yo Ho. And now I'm in my 20s, and I know all of the other tracks like Palm Grease and Butterfly. They've all been kind of pedestrian. They're good and funky, and there's a little bit of my imagination as far as the beats. The beats aren't totally stock, but it's not my level. I can expand way more than that. So anyway, I'm chanting to be immortalized like Elvin Jones or Philly or Joe or Roy or Tony Williams. That was my prayer, and I'm a young guy, so it didn't seem outrageous to me. It's like if this really worked. So I went back in and I noticed I felt different. And David Rubinson was still like, "Arr!" And I lied to him. I said, "Man, you got a great idea." And the idea was shit. It was a horrible idea. He sat down and went, "Here's what I want. Do pop this kind of thing." And I'm like, "Oh my God." So I said, "David, you have a great idea, but we're used to playing it this way." Which we weren't. Paul came up with a brand new bass line right on the spot. I made the groove up right on the spur of the moment.
What did you all had played the song before live though?
On the road, but we played a different bass line, and I used a different kind of whole thing. I mean, once we got to the ride cymbal and you're in Herbie's solo, do what you want, but the beats were different and everything. And the bass line used to be doon 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 doon. So I played accordingly. So David Rubinson was like, "All right, but you got one take to make it in." He stormed out.
Jeez.
Herbie counted it off, and what you hear is exactly what happened. And then when I went in the booth afterward, David Rubinson came and hugged me, and he said, "Thanks for fighting for it. This you just made history. Everybody's going to love you." And I'm like, "What?" Because a minute ago, before that, he wanted to kill me. And I remember saying, "Well, I thought it was like Coltrane. We're all going to try to make good music. I didn't think we were going to argue about making good music or great music, what I considered great." Herbie came in, and when he heard the tracks, he high-fived me and he went, "You just made history, bro." Everybody was like, and it wasn't like I was Paul's bass line was as important as anything I did. Me and Herbie get most of the credit for the playing, but Paul was, look, without that, it couldn't have happened. And his thing, if you listen to put me and Herbie in the background and listen to what he's doing, it's genius stuff, man.
Yeah.
Of course, Hancock is genius all day long, so his thing was ridiculous, his playing, and that's his tune. He wrote it. But I've been that tune, so it did make history for Herbie and them, but also as a drummer, it's lasted me a lifetime. And people are to this day, "How did you do it? And what was it you're doing?" And blah, blah, blah. But it worked. The chanting worked. And it used to be entitled "The Spook Who Sat by the Door" from a movie.
Right.
And after that, he changed the title to "Actual Proof."
Still get that movie soundtrack. I have it somewhere. And The Spook Who Sat by the Door has like extended versions, other versions of that tune.
I didn't play on the one everybody knows, but I played on one of them, and I've never heard it to this day, but I remember doing it, and I don't know what happened to it. And this was way before we did it as Actual Proof.
So after that, Manchild and Flood, what was the vibe on those records, and where were you at, and where was the band at then?
Well, on Flood, there's a crazy story there. We did Flood the first night, and it was amazing. Way better than the Flood you've heard, in my humble estimation. It wasn't like there was any more innovative stuff, but it was total groove, total pocket, a lot of great ideas from everybody. It was just one unusually synced up beautifully. And that night we celebrated, and we stayed out and we drank and we hung out. We were young guys. We hung out till 6 in the morning, and then got up at 9 and flew to Osaka.
Wow.
So we rode into the gig in Osaka. We're hungover. Everybody's like, "Oh my God." And there's a sound truck there. We're like, "Well, why did you have a sound truck here?" And he goes like, "Well, David Rubinson thought, hey, since we're out here, we might as well get 2 nights." And I remember saying, "Man, we have such a great night in the can, and everybody's not feeling well, and David won't know the difference between a bad night and a good night." But anyway, he chose the second night. And I knew, he didn't. It was like, "What do you mean everything's just as good as the first one?" Me and Paul were like, "Oh my God." So that's the Flood you're hearing. The first one was much better. Like I say, no more technique, no more inventions. No, it was the same stuff, but just lined up like unbelievably so. Now Manchild is when, he hired a rhythm guitar player that couldn't solo. Herbie did. Now it's his band, not mine. And people were asking me to really play straight. "We're going to make a lot of money if we'll worry about jazz and playing later. We're going to make money now," which I knew the band wasn't going to see any of this money. No.
Right.
Yeah, no way. I mean, it wasn't like we were poor. We were doing okay. He paid us fairly well for those days. But I got no complaints at all. But it was like, everything was like really straight. And I felt we were a band that sounded like they needed a singer. We're up there playing straight time. And on many of those tracks, it was just Paul and I. And Herbie would say, play till I tell you to stop. And we'd play for 4 minutes and we'd just play. And these simple, real simple grooves, he took it to LA and put a whole band on it. The only one I remember doing live was dun 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 dun, whatever the name of that is. Hang up your hang-ups.
Hang up your hang-ups.
I did one more live, I don't even remember, but most of them were just little, you'd be like, so there was no plan, and that I was becoming unhappy and withdrawing because we were no longer coming up with anything, and it was like, I mean, of course, when Herbie solos, it's fantastic, but I've never been the kind of guy to just sit back there and play straight time. If you want to, if somebody wants to pay me enough, I do know how to do that. That's not who I am.
Survival of the fittest. Some of that's pretty hip, as I recall.
Yeah, I mean, I used an 18-inch bass drum, but they put like 16 mics on it or something. I liked some of Survival of the Fittest. It was okay. Yeah, it was heavily produced, and there was a lot of infighting in the band. Very bad vibes between the band members. People were angry, and it was becoming. And I was more playing jazz gigs all over the place, and I would listen to Sonny Rollins and Bird and Coltrane all day, and these cats were listening to Kool and the Gang, and it was becoming a vibe in the van.
So what was what made you finally leave?
Well, there were some personal things going on where, like, I wasn't caring for the vibe coming my way. Herbie Hancock and Paul and I were always good friends, and when we played as a trio, it was wonderful. But some of the other cats in the band were bugged, and they didn't want me to do any blowing, no drum solos anymore, just two paps. So it was getting weird. And finally, Herbie called me one night, and he goes like, "Hey man, I don't know, you seem unhappy." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not digging it, man. I don't know what to do. It's a great gig. I need the money. You're Herbie Hancock, but we're not playing like you and Tony did. We're playing studio. I mean, for him it's great, and it's his band. So
Right.
I just couldn't do it anymore." And he knew it, and I knew it, and me and a couple of guys in the band threatened to get out of the van and fight. I'm like, yeah, I told a couple of them, "Bring your ass over here, let's do it, man." And they told me, no. So pretty soon it was time. Yeah, it is actually a family, and we had family issues like every other damn family. So
Right, exactly.
those guys, man, I don't care what happened, or who said.
Did the trio with Herbie and Paul, was that recorded?
Well, Actual Proof was pretty much that, except for Benny's flute part. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And one time we went to Italy, I believe, as a trio, just the three of us, and it was, whoa, boy, that was great. And I want to just close with this, not close the talk that we're having, but Herbie Hancock. I said some stuff here was my feelings about the music. As far as him, he gave me an opportunity that's lasted me a life. So I love the guy. He's a great guy. He's a champion of humanity. He's a genius of all things music. But, at one point I just had to, I'm a human being too, and I was young and I wanted to play. I'm watching Elvin and Tony. I'm not saying I can play like those guys, but Tootie Heath, Mickey Roker, everybody's swinging and playing. I want to be those guys. So now I am that guy.
Great. Well, thanks so much for speaking with me, Mike, for the channel. I really appreciate it, man.
And thank you so much. Let me know anything you need. Always a pleasure. Great questions. Thank you for some intelligent, knowledgeable questions. Yeah, baby. Okay. Over and out, everybody. And whatever this is, mic drop.
Thanks, man.